Introduction to Cascading Style Sheets. Cascading Style Sheets, or popularly known as CSS, is a technology that lets you style the web pages. Styling a web page would mean formatting it with different colors, fonts, and also changing its layout. In this training course, you will first learn the concept of CSS and then the commands that can be applied to style pages. We highly encourage you to try the examples that will be discussed during this training. Just like you can get a completely different look by changing the hairstyle, adding a beard, wearing a hat, etc., while still being the same person, similarly, using CSS, you can change the look and feel of a web page, keeping the content the same. The image on top shows different looks of the people, while at the bottom shows a single web page, and then below it, the same web page with different CSS styles applied to it. So CSS does not change the web content, it only adds a superfluous layer of style on top of it. So more specifically, what is CSS? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It defines how to display the elements on a web page. It can be written in the HTML page itself or an external file with the extension .css, in which case it is called an external style sheet. CSS also enables you to change the layout of a web page. Let's look at the syntax of a typical CSS command. Each CSS command that is applied can be thought of as a CSS rule applied to the web page. The CSS rules are written in the format as shown here. First is the selector, which is an HTML tag element like the paragraph. Then the declaration, which tells what style to apply to this element. The declaration is enclosed in opening and closing curly braces and may have multiple formatting rules to change the font, color, bullets, etc. Each formatting rule has a property and a value. For example, the font size is the property and 14 pixels is the value. Each formatting rule is separated from the other by a colon. CSS can be written in 4 different ways. The inline CSS is when you write the CSS rules in the HTML tag elements itself as a style attributes as shown on top of the first item. Here we have placed the style information in the opening paragraph tag, so this styling will apply to only this tag. The next is the internal CSS, where we put the styling information enclosed in the opening and closing style tags. This styling information can be placed in the HTML document's head section. The third is the external CSS, where we put all the styling information in a separate file appropriately named with the .css extension. This file is then included in the HTML file using the link tag as shown here. This link tag itself is usually placed in the head section. This technique has the advantage that it totally decouples the styling information from the main HTML file, and tomorrow if I just replace the .css file with a new one, I can easily change the look and feel of the whole web page. This separation also makes it easier to maintain both the HTML and the CSS files separately. Many a times the mobile versions of the main site are simply formatted differently and linked to a different CSS file instead of making a new HTML website for mobile devices. No wonder this is one of the most preferred methods. The fourth and the last method is called the imported CSS. This is similar to the external CSS and uses the import command to link to an external style sheet. CSS syntax key points. Before we start writing CSS, let's again look at some key terminology related to CSS. A selector is an HTML element like a paragraph, h1 tag, input control, etc. Every CSS declaration is described with a property and its value. The property is a particular style attribute you want to change, for example, the color, and the value is what you want to change it to, for example, red. Did you notice that the property and the value are written in curly braces following the selector? Every property and value is separated by a colon, and one rule can have multiple properties and value pairs, each separated by semicolons. Comments are an important part of any coding discipline. They don't affect the output in any way, but help in documenting the commands that are written so that it is easy for others working on the same files to understand what was done. Comments in CSS are written using the /* star followed by the line to be commented and then ending the comment with a star and another / effect on the output. CSS measurement units. When we are adding style information to the web page elements, often we will need to give values for font sizes, spacing between elements, etc. CSS has a number of units you can use to express these sizes. These are listed here. The simplest and the most common, and the one that I would encourage you to stick to for this training course, is pixels, denoted by px. A single web page may have many different paragraphs. You may not want to style all these paragraphs the same. Probably you only want the border around the first paragraph, but we have seen that with the CSS rule, once you choose a selector like paragraph, the rule applies to all the paragraphs. When you are setting the style for a specific HTML element, CSS provides a method where you specify your own selectors using the selector ID. IDs are denoted with a pound symbol in front of them. Thus, in the example here, style1 is a rule that will be applied to any element that has its style as style1. Class selectors. What if I don't want a unique style for all the paragraphs, but rather one style for the first and the last paragraphs on the page and a different style for the remaining ones? IDs are unique, so this approach will not work efficiently here. CSS allows you to assign the same style to a group of elements using class selectors. You can have multiple elements share the same class, and any styling defined for that class will be applied to all the elements of that class. This is different from the IDs, as different elements cannot have the same ID. The class selector is used to style for a group of elements. The class selector uses the HTML class attribute, and this is defined with a symbol like a point or a dot. Here we see an example of the class style1, which defines two formatting rules. Any element that is defined with the class style1 will have these formatting rules applied to it. Note that you do not start a class name with a number, as this is not supported on some browsers. CSS with grouping selectors. Let's say you want to apply the same styling to a few different selectors on the same page. One way could definitely be to use the class selector, but a simpler shortcut way to do the same thing is to group the selectors using commas. In the example shown here, the three statements on the left apply different color formatting to H1, H2 and P tags, and this statement is equivalent to the statement on the right. This is called grouping of selectors.